Welcome to the Greater London Podcast, the podcast that wants to make London even greater. I'm Daniel Korski, your host, and today I'll be speaking to Christian Hernandez, the managing partner at 2150, a venture fund that invests in technologies that want to make cities greener. The kind of technologies we need to be applying in our homes, the kind of things we need to change in our offices in order to make our cities, and London in particular, nicer, healthier, cleaner. We're going to be talking about some of the challenges of trying to get that done, and we're going to be talking about some of the solutions that are still out there and still within our reach. So join me, like, share. I know you'll enjoy it. Welcome to the Greater London Podcast, Christian.
Great to be here.
So first, let's start with your own journey. You're not from London. How did you make it to London?
I'm what somebody once referred to as a citizen of nowhere, and I proudly embrace that title. Born in El Salvador, grew up in Mexico, the U.S., Paris, went back to school in the States, and ended up in London 18 years ago last week.
Wow, well, congratulations. Well, that's a lot of places to have lived, but somehow it had to be London, and you clearly wanted to stay. Well, out of all those places, why London? Why is it that London was the kind of place that you wanted to come?
So the real story is my wife got a job here. We were living in Paris at the time. We just got married. She couldn't work in Paris, and she got a job here at London Business School. So she reminds me all the time. She did get her visa first, and then I came over on her visa. I was working for Microsoft, and then Google called me and poached me for a job here in London. And so I moved 18 years ago and haven't left ever since. And I don't think I would find anywhere else in the world that I'd actually rather be.
Amazing. And your career really, Christian, is a sort of arc of technology, both generally and in this city. You know, you worked at Microsoft, the traditional kind of technology behemoth. Then I think you went to Google. I think you were even at Facebook at some time before you went into venture investing. It's really a kind of arc of what's happened in the city over the last, 18 years.
Yeah. So the little secret about Facebook opening up in London is we purposely looked for the office that Google had started in London and rented that.
Oh, right. What, to make a point to Google? We're coming for you.
Sloane Square.
Oh, right.
Wait
a minute. So you were in Sloane Square. That is so out of
Sorry,
sync.
not Sloane Square, Soho Square.
Soho Square. I was thinking like, wow.
No, Soho
Sloane Square is totally out of sync. That was a sort of secret was about to come
this
out.
tiny little office that Google had started in as well before they moved into like fancy offices. And now Palantir is there. So interesting. Maybe that's a sign of what's to come.
Okay, fun. Interesting. And then you went from there into investing, and you think you started if you don't mind me saying so, a successful but pretty plain vanilla investment fund, and you operated that for a while, and then you decided that it just wasn't the right thing. I remember speaking to you at the time. You said, Daniel, I've got to do something big. I know exactly what it is. I'm just going to come back to you later. And then suddenly you unveiled this extraordinary effort that is 2150, which I think was one of the first, climate-focused venture funds, certainly in the UK, maybe in Europe, perhaps even globally.
Yeah. So backtrack to my history of London. I was at Facebook. I joined in 2009. MySpace was still bigger at that point. Part of the landing team here. My job was to go find startups that would build on top of Facebook. Effectively, go find the Zynga of Europe. And my colleagues, to be fair, didn't think that existed. And I got to work with Spotify in the early days. This company called King that was making this game called Candy Crush, the first launch on Facebook. So all these companies that became big. And I was able to prove to my colleagues in the US that, yes, you can make world-class companies out of London. And that led me to also really thrive in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. The Tech Roundabout had just started. Tech City that got launched soon after that. And I wanted to work with that ecosystem, right? Like finding the right entrepreneurs, backing them. And that, given I didn't have a brilliant idea of my own, required investing. So launched a venture capital firm. Then we did a vertical golf app. We did pet food. Butternut Box is really good. I recommend it for your dog. We did e-commerce companies. But yeah, I mean, more of a generalist VC between London and New York initially. But then I had a midlife crisis, I think, that made me realize that you could use the vehicle of venture to drive impact. And the biggest economic opportunity, but also biggest challenge for us as humans is actually climate change. And trying to find technologies that could actually make London, that you're building your home, sustainable.
I want to come to that, but I just want to spend a second on this transition, because setting up a venture fund is very hard. You have to convince a lot of people to invest in you. You get tied in for many years, minimum 8, arguably more in many cases. And the choice that you made to leave, I think, was an incredibly bold one. I mean, how did you deal with that complexity? I mean, you obviously knew where you were going, but that was still a kind of ephemeral vision of yours. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, so nobody thinks about this. Somebody once said that I was a financial entrepreneur. I'm like, that sounds like a weird thing. But yeah, you're doing a startup. It just happens to be a financial
And
startup.
normally the words financial entrepreneur suggests something untoward and potentially illegal.
Exactly. It actually happened here on the banks of the Thames. I've been thinking about it, and I went for a walk, about 2-hour walk, starting at the London Eye. I don't even know where I ended up. It was pretty far away. Just making a decision, kind of talking to myself about it. It was a chilly January day, I remember. Yeah, I mean, it's really, really hard to effectively like walk away from something you started and something that you're so linked into. But I think there was the midlife crisis or moral crisis that was kind of driving it. And I look back and really proud of what we built with White Star, but actually extremely proud of the impact we're having now with 2150.
So let's start there. So you realize that the thing that you're really passionate about is affecting the climate crisis. You know a lot about investing in cutting edge technologies. And then you started thinking how to bring all that together. But where did the city come in? Because a lot of people are focused on how to mitigate the effects of climate change. They don't normally start thinking about cities. They think about agriculture or industry more generally and so on. So why did the city? Is it because you were in London, or it happened while you're walking in the Thames and you were looking around at the buildings? Kind of how did it come about?
Yeah, so spent about a year kind of investigating the problem set, if you will. If you ask the average person in the street what their biggest impact on climate change is, they'll probably say either aviation fuel, how many plane rides they take, or how much meat they eat. And those matter, but aviation fuel is like 1% of global emissions. The 50% of global emissions are buildings and industry, the places we live in and how we stay hot or cold, and all the stuff that makes stuff for us to consume inside our homes. And that is a misallocation of capital because those two segments only receive about 13% of private equity and venture capital investment.
I read somewhere that about 80% of London CO2 emissions come from its buildings. Is that right?
Yep. So I was actually researching this the other day. So London has about 22 megatons of CO2 emissions, ambitions to make it net zero by 2030, which is not that far away. And if you start looking at where the emissions come from, obviously, yes, lorries going left and right and cars and vehicles, but it's the heating and cooling of our buildings. And that's just the operational carbon of, as it's called, of the building, like running your home, running your office. That's not what's called the embodied carbon, all the CO2 that got used to make the steel and cement to actually build it.
Fly the things from country X to the UK for every worker to arrive and so on. Fine. I mean, let's get into all that, but I just want to sort of ask one further question. So out of this 80% of emissions, do we know what it breaks down as? Is it mainly residential or commercial, or is it just a sort of across the board figure?
So it's across all of it. This comes from a survey done by JLL. So let's trust that the number is correct. It's 78%. It's actually the highest percentage out of any major city.
Wow, that's really depressing.
And I mean, we're sitting on this old building stock, right? I think we looked at the numbers recently. Something like 94% of buildings in London are EPC C or lower.
Right.
By the way, there's a law that means that you won't be able to rent those buildings or those homes in a couple of years' time. So,
I think does that cover all buildings, or is it mainly for new buildings?
No, that's mainly for all buildings.
Yeah.
Think about the average housing stock, and my Victorian house leaks like crazy. My building's probably from the 1960s from my office, and just investment into actually making them energy efficient. So it's effectively electricity needed to heat it or cool it and keep the lights on. That's effectively where you use most of it. And then the fact that so much, you spend all this money heating up the building, and then so much of the heat leaks out your single pane window. So that's what energy efficient retrofits will need to focus on. So I think it's a massive opportunity. These are like literally billions and billions of pounds of real estate that are effectively stranded assets, and that could actually benefit from some of the solutions that we back, but pretty simple stuff just to make them go from EPC C or D to an EPC A+.
So let's talk a bit about the solutions. And I love the way that your brain works, Christian. You're looking at the problem, you're looking at asset allocation, you're looking at inefficiency, and you're saying, look, we got to target this asset class. But let's do the same here, right? Okay, so what are the things you're looking at? What are the innovations that you're looking at that you think can make the biggest difference? Because I think we can all think of things that are sexy and fun, whether it's breathable paint that you can put on your building walls. But what is it that's really going to make a big difference?
So within kind of the broad urban environment, we focus on like the big problem sets. Right? The biggest problem set is cement and steel. Cement, we're globally addicted to cement, and it's 7% of global emissions. And then steel is 8%.
Because the smelters that you use to produce it have an extraordinary CO2 emission rate.
So for concrete, it's effectively the chemistry. So limestone releases CO2, and then the heat. You need about 3,500 centigrade to with the kilns, and then the steel, the heat requirement, and also the ingredients. And we're not going to slow down on consuming concrete and using steel. The mega cities of the future have yet to be built. India becomes so China is still the largest concrete consumer in the world. India is accelerating at a much faster pace and catches up with it in the next couple of decades.
And across the emerging markets, we're going to see something similar.
Lagos becomes the third largest city in the world. Dar es Salaam is a top 5 city. So that's a problem in kind of global south. The problem in London is going to continue to expand as it has, but it's actually the fact that so much of it has already been built. So what do we do with that existing built-in stock? How do we make that sustainable and resilient?
Right. And let's just hang on to the concrete part of it. Well, what's the answer there, right? Or are you saying the concrete and steel is primarily focused, innovating in that space is primarily for those emerging markets, or?
No, here as well. There's two ways of doing it. Either you go and destroy the building and start again.
Which in and of itself can be extraordinarily damaging to the environment and climate.
Yeah, because actually most of that stuff goes out as waste. And do you do a new construction project? Interesting angle very few people think about. There was a stat from a research report in the UK. A third of the air pollution of London comes from construction sites. And so you think it's probably the dust and the fact that there's stuff being poured around. It's actually how construction sites are run. They use diesel generators to power the equipment. And those diesel generators are really nasty and on all the time. So it's bad health for the people working in the construction site, but that carries out to the whole population.
I think the construction industry is trying to make an effort, or at least they're arguing that they are, right? There are all sorts of commitments to try to operate things differently. And I think HS2 in particular have made a real commitment to try to kind of drive net zero. Exactly. I don't know how close.
Well, it's the largest pourer of concrete, I think, in all of Europe.
Wow.
So I'm still skeptical as to how they get net zero, but they're experimenting with a bunch of solutions. They have accelerator programs with an HS2. So yeah, at least they're trying.
Sorry, I cut you off. Right. So the concrete and steel is one of the key areas.
Yeah. So that's for the new builds. What about let's hope that you actually retain the building, right? How do you make the building more efficient, or how do you make your home more efficient? And it's actually that voyage that trips people up. Like, where do I even start? What do I do? Is it double pane windows? Is it updating my cooling and heating system?
Lots of rules and regulations depending on what kind of building, what kind of area the building is in. London is blessed by having so many beautiful buildings. Public Hall that we're sitting in is one of them. But, a lot of restrictions then apply. So how do you kind of navigate that as well? Isn't that a huge problem for your average person?
Let's bring it home. Let's literally bring it home, right? So the government said that they want us to be net zero, and at a national level, we're doing an okay job. And they're literally throwing us money to actually go install heat pumps. Good idea. Very few are getting installed. We have one of the lowest adoption rates.
Is that also, I read somewhere that we need thousands of heat pump installers, and there's only like a tenth of those numbers available. Is that part of the problem?
Yeah. So let's get back to heat pumps, because heat pumps they're truly magical. Like the way they work, like the efficiency with which they heat your house. But the problem is, go back to the regulation side, right? So for my home in Camden, it literally is massively energy inefficient because I have these single pane windows. I would like to do double pane windows, but I can't because it's in a protected area. And Camden would not like me to change the glare of my windows. Okay. I'd like to do insulation. Well, I need to wait for about 6 months for somebody to be available to do the work. I'd like to install a heat pump. That is pretty expensive. I need to rip out my gas infrastructure.
And a quite laborious process. You need somebody to come and assess it. Then you need another booking in order to carry the heat pump in, then you got to install it. There's a whole sort of process.
Oh, and there's the beautiful regulation is everybody who will be able to see that heat pump needs to get permission.
Right.
And it has to be maybe a meter from the wall.
Right.
And this perception that it makes a lot of noise, it doesn't. So the intention is there. The realization just gets hard. And honestly, people just give up and just update their gas boiler. So So the solution that I did, the first solution that I did for my home was actually digital valves. It's cheap. It cost me about £1,500 for all of them. And I've now turned old analog radiators into digitized ones. And I can control literally each room. It tells me how much energy it's saving me. That alone, it saved me about 18% energy costs for my specific home.
I mean, that's a really important point here, particularly in a context where energy prices are through the roof. This isn't just good for the environment locally and globally, but it's actually going to save you money to invest in some of these solutions.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, I did it from a cost-saving perspective. Plus, I wanted to feel a bit better. I mean, I still have a gas boiler. I still haven't done a heat pump. So it's those little actions that people need to be educated about before they think about.
Well, educated but supported, right? I mean, there's a sort of thicket of rules, and it's not easy to figure out where to go, and nobody's really on hand. I don't think there's a hotline you can call or anything like that.
Yeah, no, there's in the U.S. There's a not-for-profit that actually has a website that literally gives you the play-by-play for your home.
Wow.
Here, if you go to the EPC ratings website, it'll actually, you type in your zip code, tells you your rating, but actually also gives you recommendations and actions. I think the next thing would be a one-stop click to go find tradesmen to do it.
Click here, and here are 5 tradesmen. Click here if you want to schedule. Here's the calendar. Click, boom, gone.
So I've been plotting this idea with this guy at Nesta who's like the heat pump specialist, Andrew Sissons. Actually, he's brilliant. So we have a problem that we don't have enough installers. Norway has a problem that their penetration is actually like really saturated. They have the highest penetration of heat pumps in the world. Those heat pump installers don't have that many more jobs because they've done the job. So just like we did for the tech visa, where we're trying to bring in
heat
talent,
pump visa.
Heat pump visa. I'm trying to get that hashtag to trend on Twitter.
Do Norwegian heat pump installers want to come here?
I'm sure we could incentivize them. It's probably a bit warmer sometimes.
Don't know if that it'd be interesting to see what kind of category they fall in. I guess the skilled migrant route.
I can envision like this version of like Holland with like a beautiful flowing Nordic hair, like hair in the wind as he installs a heat pump in your house.
Yeah, maybe people might want that. Okay, so I guess the thing that just seems like the most obvious question is, given the battle that you've faced in your own home, and you are one of the city's leading, promoters of innovation, and probably one of the most hopeful people that I know, is this even going to be possible? Are we going to be able to insulate the homes, and are we going to be able to make the changes given all these regulations and the, historical and protective characteristics? Is this even going to be possible?
I hope so, and I think it's a massive economic opportunity. If I was betting on where to start, I'd start with office. And yes, people claim that people are not going to the office. You still need an office. There's millions of square feet of office space that it is not fit for purpose. As in it's EPCC or below, so it cannot be rented. Tenants are not renting them because they're making choices because the energy cost is too high for them to run it. That's an opportunity for, not necessarily for 2150 as a VC fund, but for a large asset manager that knows how to go in, buy real estate on the low because it's now discounted, invest a little bit into it, and now we have a prime A+ net zero building that's appealing, compelling, beautiful place to go work.
Is another route social housing or council-owned housing?
Social housing, interestingly, is amongst the most efficient in all of the UK.
Right. Well, in London or?
In all of the UK and in London as well. Schools and social housing. Because A, it's the government's paying for the energy bill. B, they can actually like clear it out and do all of them at once.
Yeah.
So school
and remove, a lot of the liability issues that I'm sure exist when private, homeowners, look to have, changes in their houses.
So I was surprised by that. We were looking into a company that focused on social housing and the fact that is the most efficient already.
Wow, interesting. So you think the best thing is to focus on office? I mean, I'm sure that when you say social housing and the best, these things are obviously on some kind of curve, and there'll be places that aren't that efficient. But you think broadly, offices?
Well, I just think the economics will make more sense at house by house. I think there does need to be programs like the heat pump incentive for you and I as homeowners, just to help out, and just the tools for you to get educated on how you can do it, and then the facilitation for it. The fact that right now, like if you do a heat pump, right, the tariff that you pay for energy ends up being higher than what you pay for gas.
That's
so
absurd, isn't it? Yeah. Well, what kind of incentive do you think is the right? Have you given some thought to this?
Yeah, I mean, the IRA in the U.S. is just beautiful. Like the amount of momentum that I'm seeing in the U.S.
Just massive subsidy, basically.
Subsidy, yes. If for the average homeowner, if you do everything in the IRA, can get $40,000.
Well, I think currently the government is pretty clear there isn't enough money to do something like that. That may be changing in the future, but are there other incentives you've been thinking?
Yeah, I mean, so everybody says that the U.S. will never have a carbon tax, and true, at a federal level, I don't think there's going to be any appetite for this. But the U.S., a part of the U.S., has the world's largest carbon tax. This is New York. New York has something called Local Law 97. That if you're a landlord, you are freaking out. It is $268 per ton for CO2 emissions from a building.
Wow.
That starts next year. So you own, let's call it 1, 10, 100 pre-World War II buildings in Manhattan that are quite energy inefficient. It's CapEx prohibitive for you to go fix it. They're all honestly freaking out about what to do and how to go do it. We'll soon be announcing an investment that effectively is the low-cost solution for them to fix that. But I mean, that's $270 a ton, and it goes up to $600 a ton by 2028, I believe.
Wow. And you think something like that needs to be rolled out?
That's pretty drastic.
In London? No, I'm just trying to understand if that's what you think.
I think that's pretty drastic. But I think some incentive, right? So instead of maybe a tax, maybe it's a refund.
Yeah.
That you can benefit from to actually go do some of this work. So that or maybe taking that off from home decarbonization or from office decarbonization. So some incentive to actually make the math work for you to go do it. There's an agency problem. The owner of the building who makes it more energy efficient is not the beneficiary, which is a tenant who pays the electricity bill.
And the owner of the building has probably borrowed the money for the investment on a certain set of terms that are difficult to extract yourself.
The Nordics are good at this. So that if there's effectively green lending that gives you a better rate of bank financing if you're going to brown to green a building.
Oh, wow.
So if even BIPs work, so small percentage points work when you're actually doing these large scale projects.
So maybe what we need is some kind of London Green Bank that can make a difference. Well, if anybody in the city is listening to this, then Christian Hernandez wants to have a conversation with you about it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about the sort of very personal and local. We've talked about the office. I want to come back to something you mentioned about the implied emissions, because that's a really thorny issue, that'll require new standards for what we consider to be emissions in buildings, right? If we have to start measuring where the wood was flown in from, how do we get around that?
But you already have to do that. You already have to produce a report of everything that went into the building. It's just not currently incentivized in the right way. So wood, one of my favorite things. So there's this guy, it's architect, who should show, by the way. His name's Andrew Waugh. I call him the god of wood. He built the first large-scale wooden building in London back, I think, in 2000. And he just built the last wooden building in London that just opened up in Shoreditch. It's called the Black and White Building. It's an office building. Everything is built with, including the elevator shaft. You just don't think about it. From the outside, it looks like a normal building. And wood is good because it's already captured the CO2 into it. And you're putting it into a building, and it's going to stay there for a long, long time. So pre-Grenfell, the wood was not explicitly forbidden or allowed. Post-Grenfell, wood is explicitly forbidden. First thing that everybody thinks about is fires. Turns out wood is actually better structurally in a fire than reinforced steel. The steel gets really hot.
And then melts and comes,
yeah. Think about your fireplace when you have a log. It chars from the outside. The inside still has structural integrity. So the regulation around wood, Norway has a 130-meter wooden building. The world's largest wooden building is now in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A new one that's even bigger is about to be built in Switzerland. We can build tall with wood.
So your argument is basically we need to come back to this decision, this ban on building with wood, and we need to think about ways in which we can mitigate some of the risks. But building with wood is a better strategy. What do you say to those who say, here's another kind of way in which we're going to deforest the planet? London built on wood is a surefire way to decrease the rainforest at an even faster rate.
These are actually like commercial woodlands, right? So Scotland alone could actually power building new buildings in London. So most of the wooden construction right now happens in the Nordics, Netherlands, and recently France. So France is planning to build a lot of the infrastructure for the Olympics out of wood. And it's effectively this technology called cross-laminated timber. It's effectively these planks of wood stuck together that are really, really strong. produced mostly by German and Austrian companies. And listen, not everything's going to get built with wood, but that should be an option. That should be encouraged. There should be highlights of the building, like the black and white building, like the one in Norway, and they're beautiful. And like they actually even have good acoustic properties on the inside.
I can imagine. But listening to you, it's easy to get enthusiastic about some of the different solutions. At the same time, this city has a massive housing problem. I mean, young people can't get on the housing ladder. They can't buy. They can't rent. And if they can, it's often miles away from the city center, and that incurs extraordinary costs. And here we are talking about, for good reason, complicating the process of building, adding costs, whether to the public purse or to the private investor. Is there a tension between needing to just cater to the amount of people who want to live in the city and then making the city climate friendly? I mean, are we pretending that these things aren't in clash, but in actual fact they are?
So I don't think they're mutually exclusive of building with wood or building with sustainable materials and making building faster. So there's something called modular construction, which effectively you kind of make homes or buildings as Lego pieces. You prefabricate the stuff in a factory, bring it together, and you can build like in days instead of months.
And the Dutch, I think, are very, forward on this, and the Scandinavians as well, the US Germans. But we've never really, I mean, the industry here has never really taken this up. I always wonder whether, part of that is just a natural kind of skepticism, but another part of me wonders whether it's also because in a city like London, back to what you said when we started talking, you've got a lot of, strange shaped plots, and actually a lot of the sort of prefab modular build, it's hard to fit into some of those shapes. Is that part of the issue here?
Yeah, I mean, you had to customize a bit more, so you couldn't make like cookie cutter homes like you see in America, right? They can just put up plots of land with like,
and also with the additional emphasis on building beautifully, so that people really feel happy about new construction and the community they live in. Is that harder with modular as well?
No, like you can. I mean, like even like the wood building I talked about, like it looks like a building, and it fits like really naturally into Spitalfields area where it is. It's I think the developer appetite for it. I mean, it makes economic sense actually. You're building faster, therefore cheaper, less labor costs, just as good, and it's just simply the embrace. And I don't know why certain markets like Netherlands have really embraced it while others have not. Is it the industry? Is it incentives? Is it the construction lobby? I don't know.
Interesting. And what are some of the other things that we need to be thinking about? I know that you spend your day looking at innovation, and I'm really keen for the listeners and me to hear about some of the things that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, so the kind of most sci-fi company that we have in our portfolio is called Biomason. And these guys make cement, which we talked about, 7% of greenhouse gas emissions with nature. They discovered a naturally occurring bacteria that secretes calcium carbonate. So the science is to figure out how much bacteria, how much gravel, how much feed to mix at the right rate, so that the trillions and trillions of bacteria generate calcium carbonate and make literally bricks and pavers that are the same price as what they're replacing, but stronger and 95% less CO2.
So it's kind of like your own private coral reef that kind of recreates itself.
Yeah. And so they're about to open their first joint venture factory in Denmark with a local cement manufacturer. I'd love for a British cement manufacturer. So effectively, they're taking out the kiln, the oven, and putting in a bioreactor, a giant tanks of bacteria doing what they do naturally. And I love that one because it's effectively using nature to make something that humans made, Portland cement, better.
That's a fascinating prospect. As you say, it's just about to, start at scale, and it'll be interesting to see kind of how this process unfurls. But if a cement manufacturer is listening to this podcast, please get in touch. Christian Hernandez has a great link for you. At the other side of the spectrum, thinking about kind of private coral reefs is as you say, sci-fi and exciting. But at the other spectrum, there's something more boring, but perhaps just as important, even more important maybe, which is just more efficient planning and allocation of resource. I mean, it strikes me that so much, you mentioned in construction sites how much of a problem diesel generators represent, but also poor planning for so many of the construction projects around the city, whether it's rail and transport or housing. You must create problems not being able to account sensibly for the process and the CO2 emissions.
Yeah. So this talked earlier about like what I love about London, some of the things that frustrate me about London. So there's a book that I recently read that actually explains so much. It's called A Short History of London by Simon Jenkins. It literally is a short history, but it just whizzes you from the Romans to modern times. And the reason, so London's crazy, right? Until recently, there was no mayor of London. There was, and this old tension between Westminster and the city, which led to the boroughs, no centralized control. It's the only major city in the world that has no centralized control. And the mayor really only has some powers, the Met to some degree, and then TfL. Although other planning happens in the local context, which is why the skyline looks so hodgepodge, which is why some of the streets make no sense.
But arguably also why we have this fantastic city of cities where every community feels different, where you can really make a huge, choice about what kind of city you want to live in, even though we're all in London, right?
And I love the layers of the onion of London, and we can talk about that later, because it really is one of my favorite things about it. But even just like alignment on how we want the city to thrive. The pollution that happens on the construction side in Canary Wharf affects me near Hampstead based on where the winds carry, right? One can't control the other. Some regulation around that diesel generator, unless it's mandated at a national level, won't apply. So how do I I'm hoping that all these councils all have the same intensive. They want a more sustainable borough, city, local area.
And polling after polling across demographics and across party affiliation show that people do care about the environment locally and climate more generally.
So I think it's actually like aligning on some of the actions, regulations, incentives, so that I can finally install double pane windows in my Camden home without changing the glare. So quick aside, windows is something I know that very few people talk about. 45% of the heat or cooling of a building leaks through the window. And single pane windows are really, really bad. So we just invested into a company. This is not a very VC type investment, right? Like it's not tech. It's like, it actually is tech. It's laser precision manufacturing of highly, highly, highly efficient windows. To put it in context, something called the R value, which is the energy efficiency of a piece of glass. Single pane window is a 1, a double pane window, a triple pane window is an 8 or 9. This stuff we just backed is like a 13, 14.
Wow. And simply just because of the way that it's constructed, or because of the way that it's put into the building?
Think about it as a thermos bottle for windows.
Just
it's got
tighter.
Two layers with gas in the middle, and that gas kind of maintains heat, but actually the same thickness as the single pane window. So it literally is a 1-for-1 replacement, but significantly higher energy efficiency. And that stuff needs to be everywhere. And that you could apply to both new buildings, but also more importantly to this building, which I'm sure is great to protect it, and actually would replace the beautiful glass you have here with this new highly efficient glass.
Very interesting. You've in the past, I think, been very vocal about the role you think government ought to play. On Twitter, you've been arguing for various things like a government sustainability officer at a central level. And you and I have exchanged views on whether to use the power of local and central procurement in order to change things. What are some of the things you think we should be looking to the GLA, to mayor, and to the boroughs to do differently?
Yeah. So let's go back to my favorite problem set, right? Cement and concrete. A government in the UK at all levels pays for 40% of all the concrete that gets poured. Your roads.
So 40% of all concrete is somehow paid for by the public sector, roads and so on, right?
Yeah, well, just HS2 alone is huge, right? But even just like, so the government has the ability to dictate that they would like to have lower embodied carbon concrete. That is a law that just passed in a number of US states called LECLA, Lower Embodied Concrete Carbon Law, which actually says that if you're going to take any money from New York State, New Jersey State, Hawaii, I can't remember which other ones have passed it already, it has to be lower embodied carbon. And then these are some options that you have for lower embodied carbon. That's, a very simple way to actually drive action, right? And by the way, some of these solutions are on price parity or cheaper sometimes than what they're replacing. So there's also an economic
Certainly,
incentive.
Once you create that kind of structure, the race starts for finding a way to deliver within the rules in a cheaper fashion.
Yes. And that's a great incentive and kind of the power of the purse around procurement, alignment of incentives. So you and I have always talked about the military. The military in the US is one of the greatest innovators around climate change. They identify it as one of the biggest risks for the military and its mission of both defending the United States and its citizens. But then they also have the largest amount of physical footprint in the U.S. federal
So I
government.
think here in the UK, I think the RAF represents something like 40% of all central government
Yeah, it's crazy.
emissions. Although that's primarily,
It's jet
a jet fuel issue. But I do think a part of it is, inefficient allocation of, flying missions and equipment. And I'm pretty sure that a smarter way of managing their estate would at least get you to reduce some of that, if not all of it.
Yeah, but I mean, barracks, I'm pretty sure are not very energy efficient.
Exactly right.
So I think there's a bunch of areas of government. So DOE has given some of my companies a lot of money to go do pilots, prototypes, hyper efficient air conditioning units for military bases in Texas. Happens to be pretty bloody hot in Texas.
Yeah, for sure.
So embracing the innovation. The DOE loan program in the U.S. is truly magical. Like, it made Tesla happen.
This is the Department of Energy in
Sorry, the
the
Department
US
of Energy, yes.
federal government. Yeah.
And they have they had a large amount of money, which actually got significantly increased under this new Inflation Reduction Act. It seeks to scale out all these sustainable technologies, and this might mean solar parks, or it might mean offshore wind, but it also means CO2 capturing industrial sites. It also means biofermentation capacity to make stuff out of nature rather than out of petrochemicals. That's a flywheel, right? Because you invest into these companies, those companies generate jobs, those companies generate value. It's been fantastic. Actually, they got this very, very famous solar executive to come out of retirement effectively to run it for the government. So he's got like this random job. I think you've met her. Our friend Christine Harada, who I think is fantastic. She used to be the chief sustainability officer under the Obama administration. After obviously change of government, she went off. Got called back by Biden, and I'm like, oh, so what job are you going to have now? There's not that many other jobs that you could have. She's like, I'm going to have the most important job you've never heard of. What job is this? She's like, I'm going to run the Council for Permissioning. And they go, what? The council that determines the rules to permit for you to build a solar park or the offshore wind factories and to make that more efficient. And permissioning is such a hard part, right? Like, how do you actually build this stuff faster? So we could talk on and on about it.
No, but council, the point about speed is so critical, right? The world respects speed in all sorts of ways, and so often what inhibits us is our inability to do something within the time frame that is expected or financially viable. And I love that idea of like, well, hang on, who is actually in charge of speeding things up?
Yeah, so this is where it gets depressing. So the deeper you go into climate, honestly, the more depressed you should be. So to hit the Paris Agreement targets and stay at around 1.5 degrees, hopefully, we need to cut our emissions in half by 2030. So today we generate about 50 gigatons of emissions around the world. We need to cut 25. And by the way, the curve needed to have shifted 2 years ago. So not that far away from 2030, and we need to cut it in half. Every year that we don't cut it in half gets harder and harder. The reality is, like, likely that we will hit the 2030 target. But then really bad things start happening if we don't, because then we need to cut it in half again by 2040 and then half again by 2050 to get to net zero. So not very hopeful that we can do that. And so kind of, I was talking about this some of the other day, like, how do you get comfortable with knowing the potential outcomes that might come the deeper you go into climate? And my answer is, I have agency. I'm actually trying to do something about it. So if we don't get to, my technologies might not have it, but at least they're going to have a significant, hopefully, impact in the next 7 years. And we need that multiplied times hundreds of solutions deployed at scale. There's a great book by John Doerr, who's a famous venture capitalist in the US, called Speed and Scale. He invented, he was a proud proponent of something called the OKRs, which is a way of measuring performance in the offices. So it's OKRs for climate. So he breaks down the climate problem into cars and industry and construction and kind of the metrics that we need to be measuring. And there's a website, Speed and Scale, where you can actually see how we're doing on each of them.
Which presumably is depressing reading.
Some are green. Some are definitely flashing red.
What I just on that, I want to come back to something that you guys at 2150 have done. I think I'm right in saying that you coined a new term to describe the kind of companies that you're trying to support. You're not trying to create unicorns. You're trying to create
Gigacorns.
Gigacorns. What is a gigacorn, Christian?
So it was a joke back in June 2020 that's taken a life of its own. There's like panels around this topic now. So the idea is that we've been chasing unicorns, companies that are worth $1 billion. We need to be chasing companies that can mitigate a gigaton of CO2 and be commercially viable. And those are like massively mythical creatures. So to put it in context.
So like you basically have a farm of unicorns before you find one gigacorn.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, if somebody can mitigate like literally 2% of global emissions by itself. That's huge. So to put it in context, Tesla, which everybody thinks of as like this massive climate company, the last time they reported their impact metrics, they had reduced 5 megatons, 5 million tons. A gigaton is 1 billion tons.
Right.
So the scale, like not even something of Tesla scale, right? It may be much, much bigger than that. But yeah, I mean, listen, I'm chasing gigacorns, and we've kind of created this hashtag. There's a bunch of people that call themselves on LinkedIn Gigacorn Hunter as their job title now.
I love that. That's a brilliant.
No,
but a huge part of kind of starting the sort of change that you're talking about and ensuring that your agency translates into other people assuming their agency is that kind of, making people kind of feel together that there's a movement and a mission, and the Gigacorn term is brilliant for doing that. But the other thing I think you guys have done really brilliantly at 2150 is to kind of, try to agglomerate with others in this space. And I think you've just announced an extraordinary new effort.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, we always saw this as an ecosystem play, right? We needed to have as many people as possible in as many places as possible deploying our technologies. We checked recently, our technology is still a small portfolio, 15 companies, 16 companies in the portfolio has now been deployed in 38 countries around the world, from Vietnam to Bolivia to Copenhagen to London, right? It's not only a G7 adoption, it's actually like gone global. So that feels good. We're still going to release our impact metrics. We're having like positive impact and like significant impact from these other technologies. But us by ourselves, we're, 270 million euro fund and fund one, which is big, but we need a lot more. According to McKinsey, we need 3.5 trillion being deployed every year until 2050 to hit just the United Nations SDG goals, and another 1.5 trillion to hit the Paris Accords. That's a lot of money. And it's a bunch of different types of money. It's infrastructure, it's financing, it's real estate, it's industrial plants, it's industrial process. So we realized that we can't do it alone. So what we announced recently is the creation of this new platform, and the new platform is called Urban Partners. The platform exists to make cities efficient, accessible, resilient, but it does that with a 20 billion of assets under management, and it does that through different tools that can be deployed. So one is a real estate platform called NREP, which is a famous Nordic real estate developer co-founded by my partner. They build cities, like literally zip code sections of cities. And they've done Copenhagen. They've done 2 in Copenhagen. They're doing one in Sweden. They're planning another one in Central Europe. They will deploy and build sustainable cities. I invest in technologies and help them accelerate. NREP might deploy some of them, but I want as many NREPs around the world as possible. We have a credit financing platform that lends other real estate players money to go turn brown to green. So to do that retrofit that we talked about. So facilitates, accelerates that brown to green transition. We will soon be launching a private equity platform that actually buys and aggregates assets to decarbonize cities. And we want that Urban Partners to be the best friend of the mayor. Literally, I was highlighting this image, right? We want the bad phone in the mayor's office to go directly to Urban Partners when they think about sustainability in their city, because we'll have the technology, we'll have the playbook, and we'll have the money to go partner with them to do something at scale. And nothing like that exists. Like literally, I've been spending the last year kind of looking around for some. There's pockets of it here and there. And if we succeed, there will be thousands of copycats, people who realize that this is a massive economic opportunity and a massive impact opportunity, and who want to be like Urban Partners. And we'll give them playbook. Literally, we'll open source or solution sets to them for them to go do it.
That's hugely exciting. Well, Christian, look, it's been fantastic to have you on the Greater London podcast. You are such a Londoner. You said you've been here for 18 years. Some of the ideas that you've created and the kind of impact that you're having on the city is just fantastic. And what I really love about the conversation we've had is you've left us with so many kind of really exciting, challenging ideas for how we can do even further. So huge thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks.